Creo que arriba en la sala. Pero que venga cuando pueda para estar cuando pueda. Ok.
Vale, pues se lo ponemos.
10 minutitos cada otro, ¿vale?
Eso más. ¿Quién es?
Half an hour of delay, so I'm alright. Hurry up.
Start the parallel season 4, advertising literacy. There is a little change. We are going to start with the number 3 presentation. Home authorities, digital skills and family learning environment, keys for the theoretical study of advertising context in Spain. He's Francisco Cabezuelo Lorenzo, Luis Núñez Latives, Teresa Torrecillas Lacabe, from University of Valladolid and University CEU San Pablo, Spain. Thank you very much.
Hello. Is it okay? Is it working? Yeah. Okay. Sorry for being very repetitive. I'm back again, half an hour later, talking about the same topic, almost with the same title and with the same people. And I don't know if it was a confusion or not, but it's okay for me. Actually, a group of us, we have a parallel meeting in another room again. And actually, I was thinking that this presentation was originally for the other session, but it's okay. I'm glad to be here. And actually, it's kind of repetitive, but I'm just gonna, in order to avoid the repetition of ideas, and also in order to go so fast, I'm just gonna try to tell you something that I was unable to tell you at the beginning of the other presentation. It's still about the same idea of authoritas that were used in our research to talk about the internal differences in the family, okay, and the problems created by the digital gap between the different generations, okay. And obviously this is not a new phenomenon, and I'm gonna pass by so far, okay. And I'm just gonna go to we have a parallel, okay, because we have two research groups, and we used to the same theoretical basics, okay, the home authorities, that idea. And I'm sorry, because this is almost the same that I was telling you before, okay. And in this another version of the group that we have, because we have a national one and a regional one, but okay, you probably are not interested in those details. And also we have this parallel presentation for the KidsCom group, and the hypotheses were very similar, but it is not the same that previously, okay. And the other research that we have been working on is especially about the conflict within the family, okay. And if in the previous presentation I was telling you about the need of recognize the authorities, here also we are analyzing the loss of how we are missing the authorities. And that happens when parents try to apply their authority or authorities in areas of everyday, okay. And obviously your parents and grandparents are giving you information about life, knowledge, you know, from their experiences and the understanding. The point that when they know less than you about a topic, you don't trust them as a reference, as a referee anymore, okay. So the problem in this case is that parents are not be able to accomplish some function that they have within the family, like monitoring, the surveillance function, and also they are losing the authorities that they traditionally used to have, okay. And just to go so fast, and actually I have to apologize because I have to move to the room for the here this is a different presentation, okay, even if it sounds very similar to the other one, okay. In this other project that we have also based in the same idea of authorities, there are some other goals, and the first one is to study how authorities affect the different degrees of digital skill. And I forget to tell you previously that the point of the authorities doesn't mean that the authority within the families only in the older generation, okay, parents and grandparents. Sometimes we identify that authorities, okay, in young members of the family, Okay, that's very important. And as well, we have to realize, we have to recognize better that sometimes children become the authority or authoritas, and especially when they become leaders within equals groups, okay, between friends, in the school, and so on, okay. The other goal that we analyze is the contribution to the awareness of the importance of the digital training. And as I told you, even if this sounds very theoretical, at the end it has a practice behind, okay? And it's the digital training that we try to provide to parents, okay, in order them to keep the authoritas function as monitoring and so on. Actually, this is extremely important because parents have to keep the confidence from children and children from parents, okay? So the knowledge of the authoritas concept and as well the end of that digital gap is in order to keep on building the confidence, okay? The other point that is extremely important for us is the parental education. Parents need education and they need support, okay, especially because sometimes they can be totally lost. So this is the reason, because at the end of our project we have also a website where we give tools for parents in order to keep especially updated to the new technology, okay. And also we have some focus group with families apart from the service, okay, in order to get that special information from domestic intergenerational learning communities, because we don't have to forget that we are studying that from pedagogy and also from education sciences. So we are very, very focused on the point of learning and acquiring knowledge, okay. So we learn sharing knowledge and experiences, okay. And that's the point, that sometimes the bad experiences with the new technology come not from children, come in the case of adults, okay? And as well, the conflicts, as I told you, we were focused on the conflicts. We try to correct, to resolve those conflicts, giving education to them, okay? And we have also some complementary objectives, but probably the most important one is tutoring. In other group, we give them like free support and tutoring, mentoring program for parents who are totally lost with the new digital technologies, and in order to break that imbalance between the different generation. And that's all. I'm apologize for going so fast, okay. Yes, I wanted to underline those things about the authorities concept that I didn't tell you before, and I apologize. I'm gonna move to the other room because we have the presentation of the book there with the Kids.com Association. I'm a member of that association, and I say thank you to Patricia for the organization and everything, and see you later, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next presentation is called Disclosing Brand Placement to Young Children, the role of advertising literacy and attitude toward the format. The presenter is Peter DePaul, and their colleagues are Lizelot Hooders, Berline Covert, and Charlotte de Quister. Sorry for my German. Belgium, sorry. Belgium.
Okay, right. Good afternoon. So my name is Peter DePaul, and I'm a researcher at the Center for Persuasive Communication, and that is a research group at the Department of Communication Sciences at Ghent University, which is located in Belgium. I have been doing research for a year now on the EDIT project, on which my colleagues have already elaborated yesterday in the first panel session. Now today I'm pleased to talk to you about the research we did on the disclosure of brand placement to young children. First, I would like to start with a question. How many of you think that brand placement in TV programs and films is problematic in the case of young children, let's say younger than 12 years old? You can just put up your hands if you like to. Okay. Okay. Thanks for the response. So I see that most people agree. Well, the answer is not that straightforward, I'm afraid. In theory, it shouldn't be much of a problem, because in 2009, the European Union has explicitly forbidden brand placement in children's programs. In practice, however, we think that it's very hard to avoid that children are confronted with brand placement. And I think this for at least 4 reasons. First, the European Union does allow for brand placement when it is provided free of charge. Second, these regulations, they do not refer to programs that are suitable for all ages, thus including children. Third, and related, is that children also watch non-children programs with their older siblings and parents, thus also containing brand placement. And then finally, TV stations frequently show programs from countries where there is no such ban. So we think that we should still be concerned about brand placement reaching children. The main reason for this concern is that their advertising literacy is very low, and then especially for the contemporary advertising formats such as brand placement, because we all know they integrate the commercial message into the entertaining media content. In particular, children are cognitively immature and they lack experience with these advertising tactics, so it is very likely that they will not recognize and understand these tactics. Therefore, they may not process these tactics in a conscious and critical manner, and ultimately they may be persuaded without they themselves being aware of it. Now, to prevent this unconscious persuasion, the European Union has also made it mandatory for programs in general to disclose brand placement. For instance, by making use of warning cues, such as the various product placement logos we've already seen yesterday. However, studies among adults are inconclusive about the effectiveness of brand placement warning cues. Some studies show they have no effects. Some show that they can indeed decrease advertising effects, and some studies even show that they can actually stimulate persuasion. Nonetheless, there is a couple of studies that more consistently show that brand placement warning cues can mitigate advertising effects, but provided that these cues activate people's advertising literacy, and when taking into account people's skeptical attitudes towards the advertising tactics. So in the present study, we wanted to check whether these findings are similar in the case of children. More specifically, we have investigated 2 things. First, whether a warning cue can activate children's cognitive or conceptual advertising literacy for brand placement. And second, whether this activated cognitive advertising literacy will result in a different brand attitude depending on children's skeptical attitude toward the brand placement format. Okay, let's start with the effects of warning cues on children's cognitive advertising literacy. A small number of studies indeed show that these cues can be very effective in helping people to recognize brand placement as advertising and to make people reflect on its commercial intent. What we do not know is whether these cues are also effective in triggering the advertising or the cognitive advertising literacy of children. This might be a real challenge in the case of non-traditional advertising such as brand placement. That is because brand placement integrates the commercial message in media that's generally overstimulating and also entertaining. This implies that children may not have enough cognitive resources and also not enough motivation left to identify the commercial elements and to reflect on their commercial intent in the first place. Nonetheless, we think it's reasonable to expect that when we show children a warning cue for brand placement, their cognitive advertising literacy will be higher than when we show no cue at all. Of course, this process doesn't stop here. Most studies also expect that warning cues will decrease advertising effects, that is through the application of advertising literacy. This is often called the cognitive defense view. The proponents of this view assume that people who are able to recognize and understand an advertisement will almost automatically process that advertisement in a rather negative, critical manner, which will then consequently lead to a decrease in advertising effects. Yet again, we need to keep in mind that children's advertising is generally very cognitively demanding and also heavily appealing to children's emotions. This implies that even those children who recognize and understand an advertisement may still not be able and motivated to consequently process the advertisement or the integrated commercial messages in an elaborate, rational and critical manner. For this reason, Esther Roosendaal and her colleagues who have also presented yesterday and are present in this room, they have suggested that studies should focus more on attitudinal, effective mechanisms to process advertising. That is because these effective attitudinal mechanisms, they should require less conscious effort, and therefore they should be highly suitable for children whose cognitive resources and motivation are depleted. Now, a small number of studies among adults have already taken into account these attitudinal mechanisms in the case of covert marketing tactics. In particular, all of these studies have found that the activated advertising literacy indeed decreases advertising effects for covert marketing, but only among people that were skeptical toward these tactics. All this taken together, we expect no straightforward negative effect from warning cues on children's brand attitudes through cognitive advertising literacy alone. We do expect negative brand attitudes, but only among children that are skeptical or highly skeptical towards the brand placement advertising format. To test these hypotheses, we conducted a small experiment among 63 children between 7 and 9 years old. All of these children saw a 7-minute video clip taken from a popular kids channel in Flanders, Belgium, about cooking sausage rolls, as you can see in the bottom right pictures on the slide. The footage includes a prominent brand placement for Heinz ketchup, which was well integrated into the storyline. For the experiment, we randomly assigned the children to one of the two conditions. In the first condition, we showed the children a warning cue, as you can see in the top right picture. It actually says in Dutch, caution, this program contains advertising. And we showed that immediately before the video. And the other condition, we didn't show any cue at all. After the video, we asked the children to fill out a short illustrated questionnaire so we could assess their level of cognitive advertising literacy, their skepticism towards the advertising format, and their brand attitudes. And now for the results. The first mediation analysis clearly shows that a warning cue is effective in triggering children cognitive advertising literacy, which confirms our first hypothesis. However, the analysis also shows that the warning cue does not lead to changes in children's brand attitudes through cognitive advertising literacy alone. But let's see what happens when we take into account children's attitudes. Now, the picture has changed completely. That is, the moderated mediation analysis shows that the effects of the warning cue on brand attitude through cognitive advertising literacy is moderated by children's skeptical attitude toward brand placement as we expected. Yet we should also take a closer look at the conditional effects of the last analysis. In this figure, we see the relation between cognitive advertising literacy on the x-axis and brand attitudes on the y-axis, and this for several levels of skepticism toward brand placement. And now we are confronted with two remarkable, unexpected findings, and here I need your full attention. First, the blue slope shows that cognitive advertising literacy indeed leads to a more negative brand attitude, but only among the children that are least skeptical toward brand placement, which is actually opposite as what we expected. Second, the yellow slope shows that cognitive advertising literacy can also lead to a more positive brand attitude, but then only among the children that are most skeptical toward brand placement. Obviously, these results raise a lot of questions and they beg for an explanation. So let us first discuss the finding that cognitive advertising literacy leads to more negative brand attitudes among children who are least skeptical toward brand placement. I think that here the good old persuasion knowledge model can offer an explanation. The persuasion knowledge model states that when people become aware of a persuasion attempt, a possible reaction is that they may completely detach themselves from the attempt, because people are said to not to like to be the target of persuasive tactics. So it could be possible that the least skeptical children that they will not engage in an elaborate critical reflection on the advertisement, but instead that they will show a more direct defensive reaction as they become better aware of the persuasion attempt. Second, there is the finding that cognitive advertising literacy leads to more positive brand attitudes among children who are most skeptical toward brand placement. In line with the previous explanation, we propose that children with a more skeptical attitude toward brand placement are also the children that have a more developed critical thinking disposition. Children with such a critical thinking disposition may then be less likely to immediately detach themselves from the advertising and more likely to process the commercial content in a more elaborate manner. So this elaborate processing may translate into more positive brand attitudes in two ways, I think. The first route is by consciously and critically evaluating the advertisement, but then in a positive way. Second explanation could be that children who elaborately process the advertising are also more devoting more attention to the commercial content, which immediately stimulates persuasion. I'd like to end this presentation with one caveat. That is, we need to keep in mind that the participants in this study are very young, so we should be very cautious when suggesting such complex mechanisms to explain their processing of advertising. So I think we definitely need more research on young children and very young children's abilities regarding critical and elaborate reasoning in the context of advertising. Nonetheless, we have demonstrated that warning cues are effective in activating children's cognitive advertising literacy for brand placement. We have also demonstrated that these cues can have a big impact on advertising effects through the activation of advertising literacy, but also that this effect can also be revealed when we acknowledge the variation in children's skeptical or critical attitudes toward advertising and its tactics. Thank you very much for your attention. I suppose there are some questions.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
And the third presentation is do children have to understand a message persuasive, intend to be advertising literate? And the author is Niels Borsel.
Yeah.
From University of Mannheim, Germany.
Can we just start?
What is yours?
No. That's mine, yeah. Does it work?
It should work.
Yes,
okay.
it works.
Perfect.
That's a great thing.
Okay.
Yeah, hello everybody from my side as well. I'm going to talk about advertising literacy, so this presentation basically nicely fits into this panel. And if you start to get familiar to the literature on advertising literacy, you'll notice that there are different concepts of advertising literacy and a lot of works which offer genuine insight into this topic. But at the same time, you will probably notice that there's not really a commonly shared concept of advertising literacy, and as well that there's at least no big discussion on between the proponents of the different concepts on the specific strength or weaknesses of the concepts. So kind of, I like to call this what we have there is a state of peaceful coexistence. My presentation will be concerned with the conceptual clarity of advertising literacy. So it's something which we heard about yesterday already as well, when Ralph presented some of the work of the big Belgian group being interested in this topic, and I try to make a little contribution to this as well. I try to show that there are basically two different lines of defining or conceptualizing advertising literacy. And this might help us to better pool our research efforts on the one hand, and maybe in the longer term to instruct literacy programs and legislation. Okay, first thing I want to do is to present two different concepts of advertising literacy, and this will be a very short presentation, so they're much more complex than it will look like in my short overview, so I have to apologize in advance for not giving an account of the whole concepts and all of the complexity of these concepts. And the first concept, I think I don't have to introduce it anymore in detail because we've talked about it yesterday already. This is the concept suggested by Rosendahl, Lapierre, Van Rijmerstal, and Boysen, and three of them you already met here in this conference, so very great. And the idea here is that advertising literacy is a concept which is composed of three different dimensions: conceptual advertising literacy performance, and attitudinal advertising literacy. And I just go a little bit into more detail in this part when we talk about conceptual advertising literacy, because we haven't done this yesterday. And if you just flip through the 7 different components which are suggested here, then you can see that basically things which don't come as a surprise. We've got the recognition of advertising, we've got an understanding of the selling intent, of the persuasive intent, of the advertiser's persuasive tactics, and finally that there's a bias, or might be a bias, in advertising. So, very short. The second concept I want to introduce is a concept by O'Donoghue and Tinnen from '98, and these two authors again suggest that there's 3 different dimensions of advertising literacy, and it's a little bit different dimensions. So I'll just shortly elaborate on these. So the first dimension is called surrogate strategists. And persons score high on this in this level, on this dimension, if they've got an understanding of advertising's objectives, of the advertiser's intentions, and the persuasive tactics. Second dimension is called competent consumers, and people are competent consumers if they are able to interpret the content of an advertising message. So this is basically the pictures we see in a billboard or the narrative in a commercial, to try to make sense of what's going on there, or to try to deconstruct the meaning. And as well, if they are able to categorize ads according to convention styles or trends. And the third dimension is called casual cognoscenti, and people score high on this dimension if they've got a structural knowledge on the production of advertisements, which basically can be questions about the budgets which are involved in producing a specific commercial, or it might as well be more technical questions about filming techniques and things like this. Okay, if we compare these two concepts, there are differences and similarities. And what we can basically see is that this idea of surrogate strategist we can find as well in the... Already 5 minutes? No.
No, it's fine.
No,
it's fine.
Okay, I thought it was a warning. It came in here like smoothly. Yeah. So what we can see here, I can talk less fast. This idea of surrogate strategists we can find as well in the dimension of conceptual advertising literacy, and a little bit in advertising literacy performance. So it's not really this divide in the model of O'Donoghue and Tinnen. But at the same time we see that some of this dimension which were proposed, they don't really have an equivalent in the other model. So the question is again, which model might be more promising at this point? So in order to answer, or try to answer this question, we have to talk a little bit more about abstract concepts. And this is something which comes from my doctoral dissertation, which was on the concept of advertising in general. And I found in my work that there's, in advertising research, that there are 3 different uses of the term advertising. So the first use is if we, for example, say advertising persuades us to do things which maybe we did not want to do in the beginning, or generally persuades us to do things. And if we use the term advertising in this way, then basically we aim at a social mechanism, which is trying to motivate somebody else to do something under specific circumstances. And my suggestion is to use the label advertising if we want to talk about the social mechanism. Second use you can find, for example, in statements like advertising is a mirror of social reality. And so in this case, we are more talking about media content and or cultural products, which you can find here, and I would suggest to use the label advertisements for this. And the third use is you can find, for example, if we say advertising finances mass media. And if we use advertising, the term advertising in this way, then basically we talk about an industry sector, which is the advertising industry. And I think at least will be pretty clear that this third use is distinct from the other two, but I want to spend some more time on elaborating on the difference between the first two uses. And to do so, I have to talk a little bit about epistemology. And more specifically about material objects on the one hand and formal objects on the other hand. So material objects basically, or we treat objects as material objects if we focus on their physical appearance or their perceptual features. And this often leads to ontological definitions. It's a little bit different with formal objects. If we treat an object as a formal object, then we focus on the function which this object might have in a process, most often in a communication process. And this then leads to functional definitions, which very neatly go together with, I've got an academic upbringing as a constructivist, so it really nicely fits together with this idea of functional definition and constructivism on the other hand. And if we have a look at the common definition of advertising, then we normally have a mixture of both. These definitions often treat advertising as both material objects and formal objects at the same time. So material object would be it's paid for, it's non-personal, it's by an identified sponsor, it's using mass media. And formal object would be it intends to persuade or influence an audience. Okay, some more detail on this. So the idea is the first use, if we refer to this functional mechanism, or social mechanism, what I called it, to use the term advertising. And if a message is fulfilling the function of advertising, then I suggest to talk about an advertising message. So we can think of this a little bit as advertising as a medium and the advertising messages as different forms in the medium. And if we focus on the material objects or treat advertising as the material objects, then we're more concerned about the thing, or basically this cultural products, what I called it before. And I would say then we should call this advertisements to make this distinction clear. And obviously there's a connection between these. And most often advertisements are advertising messages at the same time, most often, but they do not necessarily have to be this. And I'll give you one example for this. So probably most of you are familiar with the Cannes Lions Festival, and there's always a selection by the jury of some outstanding commercials. And this selection then normally tours through the movie theaters in Europe, and people go and pay an entrance fee to see the selection of commercials. And they do so, although basically it's advertisement, while if it was on television they probably would skip to another program. And the point here is that these commercials were selected because they are outstanding or entertaining in a specific way, and the audience members, they know it, so they go to the cinema to be entertained and not to be persuaded, basically. And so in this case I would argue that the advertisements, it's still advertisements, that they function as entertainment messages in the specific communication process, because it's not about persuading someone in this case. So here we've got advertisements not being advertising messages, but being entertainment messages in the communication process. Short summary of what I said up to now. It's basically three different social phenomena. We talk about advertising, advertisements, and advertising industry. They are closely connected, obviously, but we can still distinguish these three phenomena. So coming back to the advertising literacy concepts. if we have a look at this first concept by Rosendahl and colleagues, we can see that these components which we find here are very much focused on the social mechanism advertising. It's about persuading someone to do something. So if we try to locate it in this little graph, then it should be somewhere around here. It's getting a little bit more messy when we talk about the concept by O'Donoghue and Tinnen. And the first dimension, the surrogate strategist dimension, it's more or less the same idea as I said before, which we can find in the other concept as well. So we can locate it here somewhere. If we talk about the competent consumers, this was the competence to decode the cultural meaning in a specific advertisement, then basically it's about advertisements. So we have to locate this dimension somewhere here in this graph. And there was basically one concept by Ritson and Elliott from '95 who pretty much focus exactly on this, on decoding the advertisements. So it's in this tradition, on this line. And finally, the third dimension, casual cognoscenti, it basically features or refers to both advertisements and advertising industry at the same time. So if we try to find like a common place for this model in my small graph, then it should be somewhere here, featuring all the three different concepts or uses of advertising, basically. So in this graph, I try to map the conceptual works on advertising literacy. And we can see there's quite some works in the same vein as the model by Rosendahl and colleagues. And then it's the work by Ritson and Elliott, which is rather distinct. And then we've got quite some works which are kind of blurring the lines between the different phenomena. And if you know about any conceptual works which I haven't mapped in here, so please tell me. I'll be very curious about mapping it as well. So conclusions. Basically, there are two different lines of advertising literacy. One in reference to advertising as a social mechanism, and one in reference to advertisements as cultural products. And this is completely fine, because both of them, there's a reason for having both of them, because they're referring to specific social phenomena. But at the same time, there's a need for an analytical distinction. So what I would try to, would like to suggest is that we talk about the first line, calling it still advertising literacy, and calling the works in the second line advertisement literacy, which kind of then would be part of sub-dimension or something of cultural literacy, or in terms by Bourdieu, cultural capital. So it's about decoding media contents which happen to be advertisements. And so what we have to be a little bit more careful about, I think, is not to mix up these different phenomena in one and the same concept. So finally, coming back to the question I posed in the title of my presentation, about which I'm not very happy anymore, but it was, do children have to understand the persuasive intent in order to be advertising literate? Then the answer pretty much depends on the concept or the line which you're using. So for line number one, clearly the answer is yes, because it's about this social mechanism, about persuading someone. So the persuasive intention is basically the heart of the concept. While if we talk about the line number two, then the answer can be no as well, because it's not so important here that there's a persuasive intent, but it's much more important that it's an advertisement. It's okay to recognize it's an advertisement, and then to use the cultural knowledge to try to decode the meaning. And so last sentence, conclusion from this is that only the first line, line number one, gives support to the idea of advertising literacy as something of a defense against unwanted persuasion. Okay, thank you very much. This is the works I cited, and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, we are going to finish with the last presentation, materials for advertising literacy, a work carried by Patricia Núñez Gómez, María José Estables Heras, Katiuska Manzurerra, y Beatriz Lamela from Complutense University of Madrid, University of Alcalá, Spain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are going fast because there are a lot of concepts that we have heard here. So we are the aim of our conference now is just to show you one session in one of our school sessions because we have a lot of conceptuals, but I think it's not necessary. We work in schools that Pilar La Casa in the morning talk about that, so we are not going to describe again the same. And also yesterday we have a presentation in gender literacy with Laia Falcón that showed how we work with the methodology about quantitative and qualitative focus, and we are not now to talk about that. We work in out school, in some creative spaces, and we work also in schools, and developing consumer workshop from the participative culture and collaborative learning point of view. We work in 2 or 3 schools. They want all the time us to work with them, but we don't have time to do this workshop. So we have here a lot of advertising literacy concept that we have heard. So it's not. I think it's not important. You can have the presentation. So I think it's better go to the workshop. I think it's important. We start the workshops with multidisciplinary team from educational faculty, psychology faculty, and audiovisual communication. We are here, so we decide with the school teachers how to improve the workshop, and we work with the school curriculum. I mean, if we have all the time, all the units in for doing our workshop, because we work in a transversal way. For example, the geography teacher maybe have some lessons during the week we are going to work, and we try to work with advertising literacy and consumer literacy with the geography teacher. So, for example, afterwards I'm going to show you some collage. For example, we work with consumer literacy about the problem of the poor countries in the world, and they must work with a mapa in the school, and they are learning at the same time poor countries and also the geography countries. So we work in that way, in a transversal way for the. So we try in our workshop work on about attitudes and values, taking the students at the center of the educational activity. We like always work with kids, not from the point of view of adult people, always with kids, and also taking account of the skills and competencies from the 21st century that we must have to be able to develop skills for the future. It's not just content, it's some competences. So knowing the advertising phenomenon and influence, get information and related visual, verbal, iconic statics from one or more sources, a student own identity, encourage teamwork, develop their autonomy and personality and expressing their opinions freely. So we work how they can get oral skills, how can they get, how can they can work together in teams, digital skills. They finish making videos and social network and different competences, raise awareness about the responsible use of internet and social networks, social work values such as gender equality and sustainability. We have around 10 lessons built, 10 units for improving in school about these topics. We work with kids that are from, I think, 10 and to 11 years old, about 50 children, and in 10 sessions once a month. These are the schools, and this is the we try to improve their advertising in the daily lives, working values such as self-esteem, for example, in the workshop about gender. Okay, we evaluate this. First, we made a pretest to the student in order to prove their starting point, and then we try to work with them and with the teachers about the workshop, and then we change if they doesn't work properly. And here we have, I think, this is a lesson. Do you think that's it's just one example? And we work with this sometimes, and we discuss. Sometimes even we make some political debates with election. Now we have election in schools, voting about the candidates, and trying to defend their own points of view. And we show a lot of videos about the tricks in advertising, and what do you think about that? We try to improve their self-esteem with. Do you know that you can use Photoshop for this image, and you can work about it, and you know. Is it true? So. Because in these ages they are so they have a low self-esteem, you know, and we work on it. And then maybe activities with colors cards, and decided whether these ads are real or manipulated, and they play with the cards for different colors. And then it's another example of Photoshop. And do you think it's an advertising or not? And what do you think about that? And compare. Okay, and we show them sometimes things are not a simple way, you know, for them. Very, very simple for the end of the session. Sometimes things are not as shown in advertising. Time to get down to work and show what we have learned today. And so we make collage or activities like please draw your partner, because every kid maybe sometimes think worse about them about himself that the partner thinks, you know. So we try to improve the best personality of your partner. And then we have a blog always with the contents of the workshop. And I think it's important for us also because we take children to the real life. I mean, if we have worked with advertising, last year they went to the festival of Chupete. It's an children festival with the best ads from directed to children from the best brands in Spain. And in the festival they presented all the ads they made at the school. And now we are going to have in January an international congress about creative cities, and they have been working with what do you think about your ideal city in the future. So they are going to go to the international congress to explain it, to explain how they think, always the point of view of the kids. So while we are working with advertising, also we work with public presentation, English language, and new technologies. Okay, yes, they have also they came to the and they come to the university and they have a radio program sometimes to express their ideas about the life and also about advertising, and we are going to have a future TV program because they are interested in another news that adults are, so we need their voices. Of course, they are participating in the design of our research on workshop as experts, fandom in social networks. We have YouTubers, we have expertise in Instagram, and celebrities. We are going to see a video now, and I think that we try to make school and teaching more interesting and funny. At the same time, we are forming future citizenships. These are some examples about the college we do about the cities and poor countries and the better world. These are brands, working with brands. You can see two examples of the. This is an expert. This is the yes.
She was always looking for some public schools. She always had the support of her dad. They thought there needed to be more public schools. They decided to tell their friends about this. Altogether, organized a demonstration for more public schools in the cities. After many demonstrations, the mayor decided to build more public schools in the city.
This is one example, and for the end of the one workshop, and this is an example of an influencer in Google Plus. She started when she was 11 years old. Now she is 13. And she has more than 1 million of visitors and followers around more than 1,000. And this is an interview, just a short example about Taylor Swift.
I heard people talk about it at school, and so I tried it out, and since I like Taylor Swift, I follow blogs about Taylor Swift, and I started posting about Taylor Swift, and people liked it. I normally decide myself, but I post about Taylor Swift news or sometimes jokes about Taylor Swift, photos about her, and posts that she said, things that she said. I post around 5 to 10 times a day about Taylor Swift.
We have only the sound for anonymous.
Post as well. They're active while they're posting.
Not to show her.
They post around 5 posts or 7 posts. I like to keep them updated about Taylor Swift, and I also like seeing blogs of other people. Of other people.
So okay, that's 2 examples. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Before lunch, we have 5 minutes. 5 or 10 minutes for question, please.
Okay, can you? I can now. Okay, I have a question for Niels. I never thought about the differentiation between advertising literacy and advertisement literacy. And of course, as you noticed yesterday as well, I'm really much in favor of a clear analytical clarification. So thank you for that. But I'm wondering, in our project we're going to study advertisement and advertising literacy for the coming 3 years. And I'm wondering what your analytical clarification means for us. Should we just focus on new tactics, on the persuasive? Should we also focus on media content as a cultural product or not? Or should we just limit ourselves to that persuasion and the tactics? I don't know if my question is clear. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. I think you're mostly, what I understood from your presentations yesterday, you're mainly interested in this social phenomena, in this mechanism, trying to persuade someone to do something. And as we're talking about children and teens, there's different ethical perspectives on this. We talk about empowering, for example, the children. So this pretty much is what I would call advertising literacy. So, well, if I can be so fast forward as to give you any advice for your work, because you're much more into the topic, I just think use the model you're using. It's completely fine for what you're doing.
Okay.
More questions?
I have one comment for Niels. Thank you, I found it very interesting, and I think both approaches are really useful when looking at children and advertising, so thank you for the inspiration. And I have a question for you, Peter. I think, well, the results are kind of puzzling.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any explanations or solutions ready at the moment, but maybe I missed it, but how did you measure children's skeptical attitudes towards brand placements?
Maybe I should go, can I have the mouse? Go back to that slide with the measurements then.
Because what I was wondering, did you take the dispositional or situational approach here?
It's more the dispositional approach, because the question which was asked was how much do you like brands being hidden in programs? So it also involves an explanation of the brand placement tactic and an effective evaluation, actually. So of the brand placement advertising tactic in general. Yeah.
Okay. That's
And
the last question, please.
And was it related to the queue? Or did you measure it before you showed the content?
I do not understand your question. How do you mean related to the queue?
So were there differences between children who saw the advertising queue or did not with respect to their skepticism?
You mean in direct relation between that? Oh, I'm sorry, I actually don't remember if that was the case or not.
Good, because
I'm not sure. I only investigated this as a moderator in a moderated mediation relationship. So sorry, I cannot answer your question, but I can still try to analyze it afterwards later on.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, presenters. Thank you very much for coming. And it's time for lunch.
And last for not the Spanish people yet.
Not the Spanish people, sorry, for Spanish people yet.
Okay.
It's later than for you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much for coming.